By the time Eli Mercer reached the Holloway place, the widow on the porch had a shotgun in her hands and 3 men laughing at her from the yard. He touched 2 fingers to his hat, asked if she needed a ranch hand, and she looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I prayed for a husband, not a cowboy." The men laughed harder at that, the kind of laugh mean men use when they think they've found the softest place in a room. The tallest of them sat easy in the saddle, gloves clean, smile slow. He had the look of a man who had never been denied anything except on the way to getting it anyway. Eli stopped at the gate. Dust lay thick on his boots. His bedroll was tied behind an old bay gelding with patient eyes. He had walked into towns where he was unwanted before, but he had not yet walked into one where a woman said a thing like that with a child half hidden behind her skirt and a borrowed shotgun shaking just once at the barrel. "Then I reckon you've got the harder hiring problem," he said. The woman's mouth tightened. One of the riders turned his horse in a lazy circle and called up to her, "Saturday, Mara. Mr. Voss won't wait past Saturday." The child behind her pressed closer. Eli saw no more than a braid and a bare foot peeking beneath a hem gone too short at the ankle. He saw, too, the way the woman did not glance back. Some people looked at danger, and some looked after the people danger might take. That told him enough. Before we go any further, settle in wherever you're listening tonight, and let us know in the comments where you're riding with us from. There is something good about knowing how many fires are lit out there in the dark while a story begins. The riders finally moved off, taking their laughter down the road with them. The tallest man tipped his hat as if he were leaving a dance instead of a threat. When they were gone, the quiet came back in pieces, whined through dry grass, a gate knocking loose on one hinge, a horse shifting sorely in the lean-to. The woman lowered the shotgun, though not all the way. Up close she was not old, not really. 35, maybe. But grief had a way of settling on the face like weather on wood. It did not matter how many summers passed after. The grain remembered. "You still asking for work?" she said. "If you're still needing hands. I need fence mended, a pump coaxed, and a south pasture that keeps trying to become a public road. What I don't need is a drifter taking supper out of my kitchen and leaving before dawn. I can stay till the work's done. That's what cowboys say." The child peered around her then, a girl of 10 or 11, narrow-shouldered, solemn, with one of those watchful faces country children wear when they have learned too early that grown folks miss things. Eli looked away first so as not to spook her. "Mama," the girl whispered, "Juniper's caught." Only then did Eli hear the horse. It was a mare in the side pen, gray with a dark mane, one foreleg twisted through a broken board and a strand of wire. She tossed her head and snorted foam, eyes rimmed white, kicking harder each time panic seized her. Mara Holloway turned toward the pen, but she had the stiff, careful movement of someone who had not had enough sleep in months. "Hold there," Eli said softly. He did not reach for the mare right away. He reached for his own horse, untied the canteen, and walked with the unhurried stillness animals trusted more than people did. He did not talk much, just one low sound in his throat, not quite a word, the sort of sound a father uses over a fevered child because the sound matters more than the meaning. The mare's ears flicked. She blew once, hard. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "Easy now? Ain't but one foolish creature in this pen, and it isn't you." The child gave the smallest huff that might have been a laugh. Eli wet his hand, laid it against the mare's neck, and waited until the tremor left her shoulder. Only then did he cut the wire, ease the board free, and guide her weight backward. When the leg came loose, the mare nearly collapsed. He braced her with his own body and took the lash of her fear across his forearm without flinching. When it was done, he stood back dust-covered and bleeding lightly through his sleeve where the wire had kissed him. The mare pressed her nose to his chest once and settled. Mara was looking at him differently now, though differently was not the same as kindly. "You can have coffee," she said. No promises after that. The house smelled of chicory, soap lye, and wood smoke sunk old into the walls. There were patched curtains at the window, and a lamp chimney clouded by a hand that had cleaned it too many times with too little rag left. The girl's name, he learned, was Sadie. She did not speak more than 3 words at a stretch, but she watched everything as if one day she meant to write it all down and use it against the world. Mara set a mug before him. "You got a name?" "Eli Mercer." "You local?" "No. That much I had." He drank. The coffee was bitter enough to bring tears to an honest eye, and he loved her a little for serving it that way. People who had spent too long making do stopped caring whether the coffee pleased company. They cared whether it kept a body standing. Sadie sat at the table plaiting baling twine around a cracked wooden ring. A child's hands should not have known that kind of careful. Eli noticed one chair missing from the table. Not moved. Gone. Mara saw him notice. My husband's dead, she said flatly. If that's the question. He nodded once. I'm sorry. She took her own mug, but did not sit. Sorry doesn't keep the bank from calling a note. No. Sorry doesn't stop Silas Voss from circling my fences like a wolf that learned to sign papers. No. For the first time, something like weariness crossed her face. Then we understand each other. He might have stayed quiet. Most days quiet had become his shelter. But the child was listening, and the room felt too full of things no one said aloud. For what it's worth, he said, a man with money on your house laughs too easy at your porch. Mara looked at him over the steam. He's not after the house. What is he after? The spring. The lower meadow. The creek bend where the water holds cold through August. Everything worth wanting, same as men like him always are. She sent him to the barn loft with 2 blankets and a lantern with a split handle. He lay in sweet hay and listened to the ranch breathing around him. Boards creaked. Horses shifted. Coyotes cried thin somewhere out in the dark. He had nearly slept when he heard hoofbeats where no hoofbeats should be. Then came the sharp report of a fence post splitting. He was on his feet before he knew he'd moved. Outside, moonlight washed the yard pale as old bone. 2 shadowed riders were at the south line, cutting wire. Another had opened the side gate to the cattle pen. The animals churned, lowing thick with fright. Sadie stood barefoot in the yard with a lantern far too big for her hand. Back in the house, Eli shouted. One of the riders slapped a torch against the herrick. Flame licked up dry edges like it had been waiting there all summer. The cattle broke then, surging toward the open gate. Eli ran not for the fire but for the lead cow, an old red brindle with a split ear. Herds had a mind, but they borrowed courage from one body at a time. He cut across the dust, grabbed the hanging rope at the post, and swung himself into the surge. The world went noise and heat. Hooves hammered. Smoke bit the throat. He got the rope around the brindle's horns, planted both heels, and hauled her head sideways just enough to break the line of panic. Mara came flying out with the shotgun. She did not waste breath screaming. She fired into the air, once, and the blast cracked the herd's terror in 2. Sadie, she shouted. The girl had frozen in the yard. Eli dropped the rope and lunged. A steer clipped his hip hard enough to numb him to the knee, but he caught the child under both arms and rolled. Dust filled his mouth. By the time he got up, Mara was stamping at the burning hay with a wet sack, hair fallen loose, face lit savage in the flame. The riders were gone. Together, they beat the fire down before it reached the barn. By the end of it, Eli was black with soot and Mara's hands were shaking too hard to reload. Sadie stood with both fists knotted in Eli's shirt, as if she had decided to hold on first and think later. Mara took one look at her child clinging to a man she had met an hour ago and sat down on the water trough like her legs no longer belonged to her. That was the moment the night changed for all of them. Eli could have ridden at daylight with his pay and biscuits and his conscience half-soothed. Instead, when dawn came thin and pink over the lower meadow, he was still there, mending the cut fence with blood-stiff hands and feeling, against all wisdom, that leaving had become the coward's choice. By noon Mara had put him to work for real. The pump handle had split at the base, the chicken coop leaned like a drunk, and the north paddock latch needed a trick wrist to close. Eli did them all without complaint. Sadie trailed him at a distance, pretending to hunt grasshoppers while memorizing every knot he tied. Toward evening Mara brought him a plate of beans and a heel of bread out to the pump. Those riders were Cleet Finner and 2 of Voss's men, she said. If you're sensible, you'll take supper and be gone before he comes himself. Eli kept working the new peg into place. You sensible? No. So we've another thing in common. That almost made her smile. Almost. The next day they rode into town for nails, lamp oil, and feed they could barely afford. The town of Mercy Crossing sat low beside the creek, one crooked street of false front buildings and a church bell that leaned slightly west in its frame. Dust lived there like a citizen. So did judgment. Every eye in Kelso's mercantile lifted when Mara entered with Eli carrying the sacks. The storekeeper, Mr. Kelso, polished the same silver dollar-sized patch of counter with his thumb whenever he lied or feared something. By the time Mara asked for seed on credit, he had rubbed that spot near through the wood. "Can't extend more, Mrs. Holloway," he said, refusing her eyes. "Orders from the bank." "Orders from Silas Voss, you mean?" Kelso swallowed. Bank and Mr. Voss often think alike. That must save time. Eli set the sacks down carefully. "What's the note?" Mara's head turned so quick he thought she might slap him. "Not your concern." Kelso looked relieved to have another face to study. "Due Saturday at noon. Principal and back interest." "How much?" "Too much," Mara said. Outside the store, she loaded the wagon in stiff silence. The heat smelled of horse sweat and hot iron from Amos Reeves' smithy 2 doors down. Eli climbed to the seat beside her only when she did not forbid it. "You planning to fix my life with arithmetic?" she asked, taking the reins. "No." "Good. Because it won't." "What did you mean on the porch?" She kept her eyes on the road. "About what?" "Praying for a husband." She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "Cowboys come when there's grass and leave when it turns brown. Husbands bury your dead. Stand on your porch when collectors come, and stay after everyone sees the worst of you." I was not asking the Lord for broad shoulders. I was asking for somebody who would remain. He stared ahead at the road, lifting white into sunlight. And did the Lord answer? Not yet. At the blacksmith's, Amos Reeve came out wiping his hands on a leather apron burnt through at one corner. He had a nose that had been broken once and decided not to forgive the face around it. He looked from Mara to Eli to the wagon, and something in him settled. "Fenner's been talking," he said low. "Says Voss means to take the Holloway place Saturday and run cattle through by Monday." Mara climbed down. "He can mean what he likes." Amos glanced at Eli. "Can you shoot?" Eli said, "Yes." "Will you?" "Only if a better answer fails." Amos grunted, which in some men is the same as respect. He leaned closer as he tightened a wheel pin. "Your husband left papers with somebody before he died, Mara?" Every line in her body went still. "No," she said. Amos read the lie and did her the kindness of looking away. "Then I suppose I asked the wrong question." That night, Eli found Sadie in the barn with the gray mare, Juniper, her cheek pressed to the horse's shoulder. The mare stood patient as a saint. "You named her right," Eli said. Sadie did not startle any more around him. "Papa named her." He waited. "Mr. Voss said Papa stole cattle," she whispered. "Mama says that's a lie she's too tired to answer every day." "Your mama sounds wise." "She cries where she thinks I can't hear." A child's plain truth can cut deeper than a knife because it never bothers with mercy. Eli crouched beside her and looked through the slats at the evening light lying long over the pasture. "When I was little," Sadie said, "I prayed for a new pony. Mama prayed for rain. Papa prayed for peace and better neighbors." She lifted one shoulder. "Seems like God was busy." Eli nearly laughed, nearly didn't. Maybe he was building up to something. She studied him with those old young eyes. "Did you lose somebody?" He should have lied. Instead he said, "My wife. And my boy." Sadie's hands stilled against Juniper's neck. "Both?" "Yes." "How do you keep breathing after that?" The barn went quiet enough to hear gnats at the hay door. Eli rested his forearms on his knees and told the truth because children can smell when grown people offer anything else. "You do it mean at first," he said. "Then tired. Then one morning you catch yourself helping a horse, and you reckon maybe breathing kept you around for something." That was the first time Sadie smiled at him, full and sudden. It changed the barn. A day later, Silas Voss came in person. He rode a black gelding with silver on the bridle and wore a coat too fine for ranch work. Men like him liked to dress as if prosperity had happened to them by moral design. Sheriff Darrow came with him, broad-faced and sunburnt, thumb hooked easy near his holster. 2 more riders hung back at the gate. Mara met them on the porch. Eli stayed in the yard beside the chopping block, axe in hand, splitting kindling into neat, bright hearts as if he had nothing at all to do with what came next. It is a useful thing, being underestimated. "Mrs. Holloway," Voss said, smiling up at her. "I thought I might save you the walk into town. You've never saved me anything." The sheriff chuckled at that like he had permission to. Voss let his gaze drift to Eli. "Picked yourself up a new hand." "Temporary," Mara said. "Pity. I was about to offer him easier wages." Voss looked straight at Eli then. $20 to be gone by tomorrow. 30 if you don't come back." Eli set another split piece into the block. "You paying by the lie now, or by the fear behind it?" Darrow's smile vanished. Voss's did not. You don't know whose road you've walked onto, son. Eli brought the axe down clean. Road looks public from where I'm standing. Voss turned back to Mara as if servants had barked in the kitchen and meant nothing. Saturday at noon. Sign the deed or pay the note. Those remain your two choices. There's a third, Mara said. And what's that? I bury you and take the odds with a jury. Silas Voss laughed, but not with mirth this time. There she is, he said softly. There's the woman your husband mistook for protection. That struck. Eli saw it land because Mara's fingers tightened once on the porch rail. Voss saw it too, and a satisfied shadow crossed his face before he tipped his hat and rode out. When they were gone, Mara went into the house without a word. Eli waited. After a long while, she came back carrying a coffee tin. She set it on the porch step between them. Inside was money. Not much. Your wages so far, she said. Take Voss's 30 and add this to it. Leave. He did not touch the tin. You trying to save me or get rid of me? Yes. He looked past her to the open doorway where Sadie stood pretending not to listen. If I go, he wins quicker. If you stay, he notices you harder. He already noticed. Her face changed then, not softer exactly, but more honest. My husband stayed once, she said, and all it bought me was a grave. Eli leaned the axe aside. A man ain't measured by what he can carry off. He's measured by what he refuses to set down. Something in her eyes moved at that. Something old and tired and not quite dead. She looked away first. That evening, after Sadie slept, Mara found him on the back step with a whetstone in hand and moonlight on his boots. The night smelled of cooling dirt and sage crushed under the fence line. There are papers, she said. He did not speak. My husband found proof Voss has been swallowing neighboring properties with forged liens and false grazing claims. Men lost land, stock, sometimes whole winters, and thought it was their own bad luck. Thomas kept copies. Said if anything happened to him, those papers would finish Voss. Where are they? I don't know. You just said. I said there are papers. I did not say I had them. Her laugh held no humor. Thomas hid them before he died. Wouldn't tell me where. Only said if I didn't know, Voss couldn't beat it out of me. And can these papers save the ranch? If I find them before Saturday, maybe. That is the place where trust becomes costly. A secret weighs one thing in your own keeping. It weighs another once it is handed over. And if you had been standing in Mara Holloway's worn shoes that night, with the debt closing in and your child asleep in the next room, would you have trusted a man whose whole life fit in a saddle roll? Eli turned the whetstone over in his palm. Show me what Thomas loved enough to hide papers on. What? Men put truth near the things they know best. She stared, then nodded once. They searched by lamplight. The tack room, the smokehouse, a loose board under the porch, the loft where old harness hung. Eli found nothing until he reached the windmill pump housing and noticed the iron bolts had newer wear than the surrounding rust. He opened the plate. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay a packet tied with faded blue thread. Mara took one breath like a woman surfacing after years underwater. Then came the gunshot. The kitchen window burst inward. Sadie screamed. Horses blasted the barn with terrified pounding. Outside, men were shouting. Down! Eli barked. Everything happened fast after that. Too fast for fear to become thought. He shoved Mara and Sadie behind the stone hearth. Another shot splintered the door frame. Eli drew the rifle he had propped by the wall. Mara had the shotgun already, eyes cold now, not frightened at all. Backside, Eli said, I know my own house. They moved. Short, sharp, no wasted step. A rider burst past the east window. Eli fired once. The man tumbled from the saddle hard. Another set the chicken coop alight to throw light on the yard. Mara fired both barrels at the trough and showered the dark with water and wood and enough noise to make the horses rear. Sadie, she shouted. No answer. For one terrible second the world stopped. Then Eli heard it. A child's muffled crying near the barn. Then hoofbeats tearing away. They took her, Mara said, and the words came out dead. They were in the saddle in half a minute. Mara on Juniper, Eli on his bay. No time for hats or coats. The night opened before them in strips of moonlit ground and black cedar shadow. Eli saw the track plain where a small horse dragged at speed behind larger ones. Sadie was slung over a pommel or tied to a saddle. Rage rose in him like old fire, hot enough to blind. Not this time, something in him said. Not this time. They found one of Voss's hired men at the creek crossing, horse down, leg broken under him. He pointed with shaking hands toward the quarry road. "Fenner's got the girl," he gasped. Voss said, "Bring the papers." Said if she cried, gag her. Blood bubbled pink at his lip. Thomas Holloway saw too much. Saw Darrow sign off on the dead cattle claims. Voss paid us to make it look like rustlers. Mara made a sound Eli would remember the rest of his life. It was not a sob. It was the sound a body makes when grief finally finds the exact shape of its anger. They rode. The old quarry sat in a bowl of chalk-white stone north of town. Fenner waited there with Sadie tied upright to a post near the loading derrick, a lantern swinging overhead. Voss stood beside him, coat buttoned, gloves still clean. Sheriff Darrow and one other man flanked the cut. "Throw down the packet," Voss called, his voice carrying easy in the stone basin. "Child comes home." Mara swung off Juniper before Eli could stop her. "You murdered my husband." Voss tilted his head. "I improved the county." Fenner jerked Sadie by the shoulder when she cried out. Eli felt the old split in himself open wide. The part that wanted vengeance first, and the man he had been trying, badly, to become. Then Juniper screamed. The gray mare had scented Sadie and begun dancing, wild-eyed, fighting the bit. Eli saw it all at once. The lantern swinging too low, the derrick ropes frayed, the quarry mules tied skittish in the rear cut, waiting for one crack of panic to carry ruin through the whole hollow. He slid from the saddle, reached Juniper's nose, and pressed his forehead to hers just once. "Go get your girl," he whispered. Then he slapped her haunch hard. The mare broke free like a storm given legs. What happened next came in pieces of thunder. Juniper tore across the basin straight for Sadie. The quarry mules answered her fear with their own. Ropes snapped. Lantern fell. Men shouted. Darrow fired and hit stone. Sparks leapt. Fenner ducked, and that half-second was enough. Mara ran through it like judgment itself, knife out, straight to the post. Eli tackled Darrow at the knee. They went down in white dust. The sheriff swung his pistol like a club. Eli took the blow over the brow, saw a burst of light, and came up mean. He did not reach for the gun. He reached for the man. There is a way quiet men fight when they have finally run out of places to put their fury. It is not loud. It is not pretty. It ends things. Across the basin, Voss had hold of the packet. Mara fired the empty shotgun into his face just to make him flinch, then hit him with the stock. Sadie broke free. Fenner grabbed for her. Juniper hit him shoulder first and sent him sprawling under the derrick chain. Then the burning lantern kissed the spilled lamp oil by the winch. Flame went up the rope. "Mara!" Eli shouted. The derrick groaned. Timber cracked overhead. Mara saw it too late. Eli lunged, caught her around the waist, and threw both of them clear just as the beam came down where she had been standing. The fall knocked the breath from her. For one horrifying moment, she did not move. Voss ran. He ran limping for his horse with the packet clutched in his fist. Eli started after him, then heard Sadie screaming for her mother. The old life in him would have taken the chase. The man he had promised the dead he might still become turned back. He went to Mara. She was breathing. Blood ran from a gash along her ribs where rock or splinter had found her. Her eyes opened on his face, dazed and furious both. "Don't you dare leave me on this ground," she whispered. Wouldn't try it. By the time he got them home, Dawn was a pale bruise over the hills. Voss had escaped with part of the packet, but not all. In the rush, Mara had kept the oilskin wrapping under her coat, and one folded sheaf remained tucked inside it. Ledgers, names, dates, grazing fraud, false signatures. Enough to hang a dozen honest men in shame and one dishonest man in prison, if the right eyes saw it. But not the deed release. Not the paper clearing the Holloway note. That page was gone. The house was quiet by morning except for the kettle and Mara's breath catching every now and then when pain climbed too high. Eli stitched her wound at the kitchen table because there was no doctor within reach who wasn't beholden to Voss. Sadie sat on the floor beside Juniper's halter, pale and silent and brave in the way children are brave when they know fear will only tire their mother more. When it was done, Mara gripped the table edge until the shaking passed. Eli poured water over his bloody hands, then stood there not knowing where to put the tenderness in him. "You should have chased him," Mara said at last, eyes fixed on the table grain. "No. He had the missing page." "I know." Her voice dropped. "Then why didn't you?" He dried his hands slow. Because I've buried what happens when a man picks rage over people. She looked up. So he told her. About the fever winter outside Abilene. About the employer's cattle breaking south fence in a sleet storm. About his wife Nora begging him not to ride out because their little boy Caleb was burning up and the creek was already rising. About choosing duty to another man's herd over the two souls who belonged to him. About the flood washing the bridge and keeping him gone till morning. About coming home to silence that had no bottom. I was not there when they needed me most, he said. Been wandering ever since, like moving was the same thing as paying. Mara's eyes filled then, not from pity but from recognition. There is mercy in being understood by someone who has no use for performance. She reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small carved horse, worn smooth at the back by years of a child's hand. Sadie had found it in Eli's saddle roll earlier and returned it without comment. Mara turned it over once and set it in his palm. I know why I said it, she murmured. On the porch. About praying for a husband, not a cowboy. He waited. I was not praying for somebody to save me. I was praying for somebody who would still be standing there after fear had said its piece. Her mouth trembled once and steadied. Lonely is bearable. Most of us learn that. Being loved after you've made peace with lonely, that's the hard part. There are lines that sound like they were always waiting in the room for the right person to speak them. That was one of them. He sat beside her then, careful of the bandage, and for a while neither spoke. Sadie crept over and leaned against his knee as if she had made her choice quietly and expected the rest of the world to catch up. If this story is moving something tender in you, then you are exactly who it was written for. A like and a subscribe tell us to keep bringing these souls to your fire. Now stay with them, because the hardest part had not yet passed. It was Sadie who found the missing page. Not in a box, not in a wall. In her sampler, Thomas Holloway, expecting his house searched, had stitched the paper into the backing of the alphabet cloth he'd made a game of helping Sadie learn. When she brought it to Mara because one corner felt crinkly, the whole room went still. Mara cut the thread with sewing scissors. Out came the final sheet, folded thin as a secret. Thomas's sworn statement naming Silas Voss, Cleet Finner, and Sheriff Darrow in the theft scheme and in the ambush that killed him when he refused to surrender the spring. Saturday noon found Mercy Crossing gathered before the bank. Some had come for spectacle, some for pity, some because towns run on the hope that if ruin visits your neighbor loud enough, it will pass your own door by. Voss stood on the bank steps with Darrow beside him and a clerk holding the Holloway note. Finner was absent, likely nursing broken bones and bad choices. Mara wore her plain blue dress and a bandage hidden under it. Eli walked at her side. Sadie held Juniper's reins and looked like a child who had aged 3 years by breakfast. Silas Voss smiled when he saw them. Mrs. Holloway, I had begun to think grief had made you sensible. Mara climbed the steps one at a time. Read it out, then. The clerk unfolded the note. Voss lifted a hand. Or, if this is difficult for you, I can make things easier still. Sign the deed. Keep the house through winter. Spare the girl the shame of watching. Town silence settled heavy. Eli could feel eyes on him, waiting to see whether he was a hired hand or something braver. He did not touch his gun. He just stood where Mara could feel, without turning, that he had not moved. Go ahead, she said. The clerk cleared his throat and began. Mara let him reach the amount owed. Then she spoke over him, not loud, but with that kind of steadiness people obey before they realize they have chosen to. My husband left a statement, she said. And ledgers. Enough names in them to blacken half this street. Voss's smile barely shifted. A dead man's bitterness proves nothing. Maybe, Mara said. But your own handwriting helps. She held up the pages. That changed him. Some men rage first. Men like Voss calculate. Eli watched the exact moment calculation failed him. Darrow moved toward the papers. Eli stepped into the sheriff's path. Don't, Darrow warned. Or what? Eli said. You'll murder another witness in front of town? The word murder cracked through the crowd like a dropped plate. Murmurs rose. Amos Reeve came out of the smithy and planted himself at the foot of the steps with hammer in hand. Mr. Kelso left his counter for the first time in living memory. Mrs. Tally, the postmistress, appeared with ink still on her thumb and stood beside Sadie like she meant to hold the whole line if needed. Mara began to read. She read the false grazing claims. The dead cattle entries filed for stock that never existed. The signatures lifted from widows and old men who thought they were signing winter feed receipts. Then she read Thomas's statement, and by the end of it you could hear the bank's sign creak above them in the wind. Darrow went for his gun first. He got halfway there. Amos's hammer caught his wrist with a sound like splitting cedar. The pistol flew. The crowd reeled back. Voss snatched the papers from Mara's hand and bolted down the side alley toward the livery. "Eli!" Sadie cried. He was already moving. They tore through the alley in dust and panic. Voss hit the stable yard, cut a bay loose, and hauled himself into the saddle, wild and ugly now, all pretense stripped. Eli came in at a run and saw the gate still barred with a sliding pole. He could have fired. The shot was there. Instead, he grabbed Juniper's lead from Sadie's hand, where she had followed quicker than anyone expected, and sent the gray mare through the side opening with one sharp whistle. Juniper went like an arrow. She cut across the bay's path just as Voss spurred for the street. The gelding reared. Voss lost one stirrup, then both. He hit the hard yard on his back, and the breath left him in a grunt that sounded almost childlike. Eli was on him before he could rise. Voss clawed for the dropped revolver. Eli kicked it aside and drove him face down into the dust with a forearm across his neck. The whole town was there by then, flooding the yard. Darrow held bleeding between Amos and Kelso, Mara at the gate with the papers clutched back in both hands. "Go on," Voss rasped into the dirt. "Kill me. That's what men like you are for." Eli leaned close enough for only him to hear. "No," he said. "That's what men like you count on." Then he stood and hauled Silas Voss up alive for everyone to see. The rest came the way justice sometimes does in small towns, slowly at first, then all at once. Once fear breaks, it rarely breaks alone. Banker Hale confessed before sundown. Mrs. Talley produced copies of mailed notices she had long suspected were altered. 2 farmers rode in from West Ridge swearing to water diversions and forged liens. By nightfall, a territorial marshal from Laramie, summoned weeks earlier by a complaint Thomas had managed to send before his death and finally routed through, took Voss and Darrow into custody. That was not rescue. That was reckoning delayed. Voss lost the bank notes, the grazing leases, the respect he had bought, and the freedom he had worn like a title. Darrow lost his badge. Fenner fled and was found 3 counties over with a mended leg and nowhere left to sell his loyalty. The seized records restored land to 3 families besides the Holloways. Men who had tipped hats to Voss for years suddenly remembered every cruel thing he had ever said. And Mara kept the ranch. Not by charity. Not by marriage. Not by luck. She kept it because she stood in public and told the truth with blood still drying under her dress. And because when the hard choice came, Eli Mercer did not chase vengeance down the road and call that manhood. He stayed where the living needed him most. 3 weeks later, the pasture had gone green enough to soften the scars where hooves and fire had torn it up. Sadie laughed again, without checking first whether her mother could bear the sound. Juniper's leg healed. The porch rail got mended. A new pane shone in the kitchen window. There were still debts, still weather, still fences needing work. Happiness, when it comes to country people, rarely arrives looking like ease. It looks like enough wood stacked before dark and one less fear sleeping in the house. The proposal happened with coffee on the stove and rain tapping soft at the roof. Nothing grand about it except the truth. Eli was at the table repairing Sadie's sampler frame when Mara set Thomas's ring beside his hand. Not for him to wear. Just there between them, to be honored. "You once came asking for a ranch job," she said. "I did. I answered you poorly." He looked up. She smiled then, small and real and a little astonished by itself. "What I meant was, I had no use left for men who only knew how to leave." Eli stood. "I've known a good deal about leaving." "I know." She stepped closer. "Do you know anything about staying?" He thought of Sadie asleep in the next room, of Juniper in the barn, of a porch that no longer looked like a place he ought to pass by, of Nora and Caleb, whose graves would never stop being part of him, and of how love had not replaced them so much as made room beside the ache. "I'm learning," he said. Mara touched his face with work-rough fingers. "That'll do." They married in the church at Mercy Crossing with Amos still wearing his apron and Mrs. Talley crying into a handkerchief she insisted was not for crying. Sadie stood between them barefoot because she hated shoes and no one had the heart to force the matter on a day that bright. Eli did not speak the vows like a man performing virtue. He spoke them like a man laying down a heavy pack at last. Months later, when the first cold came sighing over the ridge, the Holloway place did not feel like Holloway anymore, or Mercer either. It felt like the kind of home that earns one name slowly by feeding every soul inside it. One evening, after supper, Sadie ran out to the yard chasing a new foal, all knobby legs and foolish courage. Mara stood on the porch in Eli's coat because she kept stealing it and claiming the weather had chosen her for it. He came up behind her with 2 mugs of coffee, and she leaned back into him without looking because some trust gets so complete they no longer need witnessing. He handed her a cup. Below them, the lower meadow held the last gold of the day, and the creek moved through it like a strip of beaten copper. Sadie laughed. Juniper lifted her head. The lamp in the window warmed the glass. Eli kissed Mara's temple and thought, not for the first time, that a good life does not arrive all at once. It keeps walking toward you, one lamplit evening at a time. From the ridge, the house glowed small and steady in the blue dusk, like a star that had finally learned the earth could keep it. And if you ride with us again next time, wait till you hear about the deaf seamstress sent to a mountain ranch because her own family was ashamed of her, and the scarred widower who learned her silence could tell the truth faster than most folks' mouths ever did.